Good afternoon, everyone. Today, I'm going to review what we have studied in our research technique class. The purpose of this review is to refresh what you understand about writing thesis in the English department of Universitas Chung. And second of all, it's to prepare you to improve your current mini proposal into a better proposal, hopefully. Now, let me share with you what I have prepared to help you review the materials. The first one, let's talk about research in literature. This is the first type of research of thesis that you can do at Universitas Chung, the research thesis. When you do research thesis, basically what you do is analyzing, comparing, or interpreting literary works. However, there are several options that you can make. First of all, you can interpret and evaluate the literary works alone, okay? You focus more on the content of the literary works. That's one. So you focus on the artwork here, if you see the image here. Or the second one, you can opt to analyze, compare, and interpret literary works in relation to their authors. That's if you want to know, for example, the ideology of the author or the experience of the author that made this author create the work. The next option is to study literary works in connection to their readers. This is what we often call the reception studies. You study about the relationship between the text and the readers. And finally, you can also, which is more common, study the connection between a work and the world at large. When you do this, basically, you will try to analyze, you compare and interpret the works in relation to the world behind it. If there is something in the work that you find very vague or not very clear, then you use what happens in the world, in the history or in theories that help you to explain what's not clear in the work. The second one is the creative project or the creative thesis. Here, what you do is creating a response to problems in the world, to the needs in the world. If there is a problem in the world, for example, environmental issues or maybe sexual harassments, which happened quite seriously and a lot last year in 2021, you try to respond to it by either creating a work of art, a work of literature, or you translate a book to help raise awareness of, help make people understand the situation better and prevent future disasters like that. And in this kind of thesis, there will be an equal emphasis on the process and the product. There are two types here that you can do. You can either create literary works or you can translate books. There are two types here. And these are the workflow of creating such thesis. So you see what happens in the world first, and then you respond to it by creating a work, and the work will propose what we can do about the situation in the world. And at the end, you will have to write a reflection on the process of this project. Now, if we compare the workflow of these two types of thesis, here is what we get. If you do the research thesis, you start with the initial reading. And when you read, you find something curious about the work that makes you want to answer it. And then you start gathering data, which is mainly data from outside, readings, articles, or anything that help you understand the situation better. And then you present the work in your sempro. And finally, you start gathering more data and analyzing it further. And at the end, you propose an argument. That's the workflow of research thesis. But the workflow of a creative thesis, it starts with seeing the social and psychological forces around us, to see what's happening in our world, in our society. And then you start formulating the purpose of your project. Is it to help raise awareness? Is it to entertain people? Is it to make people change their attitude, and so on? And then you try to gather information about how to create a work like that, or what knowledge that you will use, such as the theoretical knowledge. And later on, you will start writing the work. And finally, you write a reflection of your writing process. So this is the comparison of the workflows of these two types of thesis. Now, let us go to each chapter of this thesis, okay? I will move from research thesis to creative thesis in the process here. First of all, in research thesis, the first chapter is an introduction, of course, and formulation of the problem. Here, we need to understand that a research thesis includes three elements. The first one is literary work, and there is also a problem, and the systematic way to answer the problem or the question. Three elements must be there. So you have to have the literary work first, and then you analyze the literary work, you read the literary work to find a curiosity, something curious about the work. Then later on, you start devising a systematic way to answer the problem. And here, what is important is to formulate the question. What kind of question can you ask in this kind of thesis? I remind you again that your questions can be about the contents, can be about the relationship between the content and the author, the relationship between the content and the world, and also one more, the content and the reader, which I failed to mention here. And the kind of question should be the elaborative question. What is elaborative question again? Let me remind you of this table that I presented to you of this chart from inferential reading. So there are various questions you can ask to work, but elaborative question is the kind of question that you cannot answer just by reading the work. If you read the work, you will find part of the answer, but not whole. If you want to get a good question of this, a good answer, then you will have to use other sources, theories or history or many other types of knowledge. As an example, okay, you know Spider-Man. Spider-Man is famous for having the main character suffering some kind of pain, and then this pain makes this main character someone bitter, fierce. That happened in the Spider-Man of Tobey Maguire and Spider-Man of Andrew Garfield. But now we just found out from reviews that this current Spider-Man doesn't seem to follow that. So the character suffers some kind of pain, but in the movie, the character is somewhat encouraged not to fall prey into the pain and become bitter. Now, you ask that question, why does this Spider-Man not turn into someone bitter, someone dark, fierce? And then you try to see the movie. Maybe you will find some of the answer, but it's not strong because these answers are very thin or maybe not well spoken or not enough, basically. So what you do is find theories in psychology that helps you explain that when somebody suffers pain, it doesn't necessarily turn this person into a bitter individual. And you find the theory to help support your answer. Yeah, that's the kind of question that you will ask. Elaborative questions. Questions that you cannot answer simply by reading the text or watching the movie or reading the novel. If you can answer the question by just reading the novel, then it's not a very good question. You can use that question in your thesis, but the grade might not be good because that's not an ideal thesis question. Okay, the point is Find an elaborative question, questions that cannot be answered just by reading the text. It has to include other elements. Okay, next. In creative thesis, what do? You start with the observation of the world. Find a problem in the world. And then you decide that this is the problem that you want to take up as your as the starting point of your project. I mentioned earlier that in 2021 there were incidents of sexual harassments that involved people in the education and religious institutions. Those were serious problems, and you think as an intellectual, as a writer, you can respond to it. How do you respond to it? Then what you can do is you propose to write something or to translate something that raises people's awareness of the danger of sexual harassment. Something that makes people aware of gender issues and so on. So you start with an observation, you decide the problem, and you propose your work as the solution to that problem. Now let's go to chapter 2. What do we have in chapter 2? It's review of related literature. If you write research thesis, your chapter 2 should include 3 elements. First, formal theories, then critical theories, and then studies conducted on the topic or the work before. Formal theories include, for example, okay, in poetry, you study about literary devices, you study about themes and so on. You need to find this if you want to study this particular aspect of the work. And then in prose, you study, you review characterization, plot and settings, and so on. Only when they are related to your study. If your question is about why this current Spider-Man doesn't fall prey into hatred because of the bad situations, now what is it related to? It's related to the characters. So you study only the characterization. Here you review only the characterization because it will be useful for you in gathering your data. Now, there are many other theories of literature that you can all review later on. If you want to study the translation of a work, you can. It's part of the research thesis. For example, you want to compare the 2 translations of the same work, that's possible. And in this case, you will need to use theories of translation. For movies, if you insist on studying movies, it is a must that you use mise-en-scène here as your theory, because you cannot simply use theories of literature to study movies. Next, critical theories include any analytical tool that you can use to analyze problems in your literary work. What are they like? They are usually from other fields of studies, from psychology, sociology, history, economy, and so on. And they have helped us understand certain topics in the novel that we study. If the novel talks about how somebody changes, which means it's related to the psychology of a person, then your critical theories should be theories in the field of psychology. These are some examples of analytical tools that you can use: psychoanalysis, developmental psychology, Marxism, statistics, and memory studies. These are not exhaustive. There are many other theories that you can use. But in brief, in conclusion, I would say you need theories from other fields to help you understand what is in the novel or in the literary work. And there's something I haven't told you there. You need also the studies on earlier studies, either on the same novel that you want to analyze or in the same topic that you want to analyze. For example, you want to talk about how somebody like Peter Parker doesn't turn into somebody vengeful because of the bad incident, then you will need to find earlier studies on either Spider-Man or earlier studies on revenge and how we mentally react to hurtful incidents in our lives. Now, for creative thesis, you can use several things to review, several literature to review. The first one is the formal aspects of literature that you will be using for the most part. If your novel is a novel, or if your story is strong in terms of characters, then you need to review characterization and how to create good characterization. If your work is going to be more focused on the settings, then a study or a review on the settings is what you need. Then you also need to include critical theories. You cannot just talk about, for example, sexual harassment without knowing anything about sexual harassment. You need to find literature about sexual harassment that you can use to help yourself better at it, so that when you write something, you don't just write out of your fantasy, okay? It is going to be involving a lot of imagination, but your imagination has to be also done in the light of knowledge, theories, or references, or literature in general. And then what is also very important is you need to find earlier works whose style or whose elements you will be imitating in creating this work of yours. That's why I told you last semester to read as many works as possible before you start writing. Next, which is the last one, is chapter 3. This chapter 3 will include slightly different things between the research thesis and creative thesis. For research thesis, your chapter 3 will include studied material, study design, or the method and approach that you will be using, and the description of how you will gather your data, and lastly, how you will interpret or analyze your data. So these are the 4 elements in your chapter 3 if you write thesis in literature. Now, what is a method? Basically, a method includes ways and strategies to understand the reality. And it is a systematic step. It includes systematic steps to solve a problem. That's what I quoted from my source earlier, from Nyaman Kutaratna. And a method is usually related to the techniques, the ways, and the steps or stages of research. So it is basically about how you will do your thesis. And we only discussed 2 methods in our class so that you can focus more on this. The first one is the descriptive qualitative, which involves finding qualitative data, the words, the phrases, the sentences, or any passages from the text, and then describe how this data will be able to answer the question that you have formulated at the beginning. The second one is the descriptive comparative method. In this method, you will compare a topic or an issue in 2 works or more. And the works will involve literary works and in the conventional sense, or literary works which are not conventional, like movies and comics and so on. Now, in descriptive qualitative, there are 2 types that I described to you. The first one is issue-driven. So you will find something, an issue in a work. It starts with your curiosity on one issue, and then you try to find the answer to that issue. And the second one is the so-called work-driven. Here, you are driven by your interest in the work. You start with your curiosity about the story, and then you try to find the answer to that curiosity about the story by reading the work further and further. But no matter what, you will eventually need to include external works to help you understand the story here. These are the 2 stages that I mentioned to you in using the 2 types of approach, two types of descriptive comparative method. If you want to go deeper into this, you are more than welcome to review the video I shared with you last semester. For descriptive comparative, there are also two types here. The first one is open comparison, where you compare and find differences or similarities between two works. And then you try to interpret the differences or similarities to create your own argument. The second one is a comparison that is focused. Here, you decide one topic and then see how the two works discuss the same topic. Do they discuss the same topic differently? If they do it differently, then how? Do they discuss the same topic in the same way? Then if yes, you also explain how. Now, about this one, there are several types that we can compare. We can compare two different works, like one novel by author A and another novel by author B. Or you can compare a work and its adaptation between a novel and the comic adaptation of the novel, or a movie and the novel. There are several types. Or the second one, which is also a kind of adaptation, is between a work and its translation. Because how somebody translates a work can be quite different from the original, okay? Now, lastly, in creative thesis, what you do in chapter 3 is you explain your project briefly in the so-called project description. Is it going to be a short story? Is it going to be a novel, novella, travel narrative, and so on? And then you mentioned the formal elements of the work that you will be writing. If you write a short story, then you write the formal elements. Who are the characters? What is the setting? And so on and so forth. And lastly, you also, sorry for the typo, you need to explain the stages of the creation of this work. That's all, everyone. I hope this gives you a brief review of what we have done in research technique and how you will improve your work in the next, in this semester. I guess that's all, everyone. I'm looking forward to seeing you soon. Bye.